Welcome to Module 3. The focus of Module 3 is learning assessment. We will focus on Chapter 7 of Wiggins and McTeague's book, Thinking Like an Assessor. They consider the assessment implications of their emergent design by asking and re-asking the assessor's questions, which are, what evidence can show that students have achieved the desired results, and what assessment tasks and other evidence will anchor our curricular units and thus guide our instruction? What should we look for to determine the extent of student understanding? In their opinion, we are obligated to consider the assessment evidence implied by the outcomes rather than thinking about assessment primarily as a means for generating grades. The agenda or plan for today's presentation includes two key components. First, I'm going to share what Wiggins and McTeague's suggest when planning a learning assessment. And then second, an overview of existing digital tools or apps for learning assessment will be provided, along with a couple examples and tools and apps that sparked my interest. Okay, starting with suggestions for learning and for planning a learning assessment. According to the authors, thinking like an assessor comes down to three questions. What kinds of evidence do we need to find hallmarks of our goals, including that of understanding? For example, regardless of content, understanding is often revealed through exercises of comparing and contrasting or summarizing ideas. Second, what specific characteristics in students' responses, products, or performances should we examine to determine the extent to which the desired results were achieved? This is where criteria, rubrics, and exemplars come into play. And finally, third, does the proposed evidence enable us to infer a student's knowledge, skill, or understanding? In other words, does the evidence align with our goals and are the results sufficiently unambiguous? And so from this week's reading, or for Module 3's reading, there was this really cool, or at least I thought, cool graphic, which I have here, that was in the textbook. And it pretty much touches on the way that an assessor thinks versus how an activity designer thinks. I have to admit, prior to this module and this course, I believe I was more of an activity designer than an assessor. However, now understanding the difference, I feel like I am growing into being a true assessor. And so when thinking like an assessor, we ask the following. What would be sufficient and revealing evidence of understanding? Given the goals, what performance tasks must anchor the unit and focus the instructional work? What are the different types of evidence required by stage 1 desired results? And against what criteria will we appropriately consider work and assess levels of quality? And then finally, did the assessments reveal and distinguish those who really understand from those who only seem to? Am I clear on the reasons behind learner mistakes? I won't go into detail as far as activity designer or who only thinks as an activity designer because, again, I'm learning and leaning more towards and gaining more knowledge to be more of an assessor. Okay, effective assessments is more like a scrapbook of mementos and pictures rather than a single snapshot, hence the graphic I have here. Rather than using a single test of one type at the end of teaching, effective teacher assessors gather lots of evidence along the way, using a variety of methods and formats. Thus, when planning to collect evidence of understanding, consider a range of assessment methods, which I have here. For example, informal checks for understanding, tests and quizzes, performance tasks, academic prompts, and observations and dialogues. Okay, performance tasks typically present students with a problem, a real-world goal set within a realistic context of challenges and possibilities. Students develop a tangible product or performance for an identified audience, sometimes real, sometimes simulated. And the evaluation criteria and performance standards are appropriate to the task and known by the student in advance. And so the authors created a design tool using the acronym GRASP, GRASPS, to assist in the creation of performance tasks. Each letter corresponds with a task element: goal, role, audience, situation, performance, and standards. Here's an example of a performance task in science constructed using GRASP for assessing and understanding multivariable experimental design. Okay, so with the goal and role, as a scientist with a consumer research group, the student's task or your task is to design an experiment to determine which of the 4 brands of detergent will most effectively remove 3 different types of strands on cotton fabric. I think we can all relate to this scenario. Nonetheless, so the audience here is the target audience is the testing department for the Consumer Research magazine. Again, with this example, we're walking through GRASP. So here with audience, again, the target audience is testing for a department, is the testing department for Consumer Research evidence. And then we have S for situation. So there's a 2-part challenge here. First, develop an experimental design for isolating the key variables. And then 2, clearly communicate the procedure so that the staff of the testing department can conduct the experiment to determine which cleaner is most effective for each type of stain. And then we have P for product. So we need to develop a written experimental procedure following the given format, outlining the steps in sequence, and you may include an outline or graphic format to accompany the written description. And then standards. The experimental design needs to follow the criteria for good design accurately and completely. Appropriately isolate the key variables, include a clear and accurate written description of the procedure, an outline or graphic to assist the testers is optional, and enable the testing department to determine which cleaner is most effective for each type of stain. Now, please keep in mind, not every performance assessment needs to be framed by GRASP. However, the authors are proposing that at least one core performance task for assessing understanding in a major unit or course be developed in this fashion. So last week we discussed the 6 facets of design. This week we're connecting those 6 facets with developing an assessment. So the 6 facets of understanding signal types of performances we need as valid measures of understanding. They map out in general terms the kind of performance evidence we need as the instructors, as the teachers, to successfully distinguish factual knowledge from an understanding of the facts. And again, according to the authors, a student or training participants really understands, okay, when they can, 1, explain. And this demonstrates sophisticated explanatory power and insight. 2, can interpret, offers powerful, meaningful interpretations, translations, or narratives. 3, can apply, uses knowledge and context, has know-how. Sees perspective as 4th, and then 5th, demonstrates empathy, and then 6th, reveals self-knowledge. In conclusion, the question we ask when thinking like an assessor is, what's the evidence we need given the desired results? We should have no philosophical axe to grind in answering that question. We should use the best kinds of assessments, including, where appropriate, short answer prompts and selected response quizzes. Now, the final part of this presentation includes an overview of the digital tools or apps that can be used as part of a learning assessment. So, there were a total of 14 assessment tools that we learned about this week as part of Module 3. And depending on the goal that the teacher or the trainer or instructor has, will really guide the type of learning assessment tool that is best for them. So I'm going to start with the 12 tools that I learned about, and I'm going to end with the 2 that I am kind of interested in and I may use moving forward. So the first one, if your goal is to find out what your students learned during the class, you can try Google Forms. Second, if your goal is to measure proficiency and create your own online assessments, you can use Thrive Assessments. And then if you want to have some fun, which I personally do, with your assessments, you can try Kahoot. And let me just tell you, I have tried or been a participant with Kahoot, and it can be very competitive. And if your goal is to want to assess reading comprehension, Common Lit is a good assessment tool. And then if the goal is to hear from your students or training participants and watch them share what they learned, you can try Flip. And then if your goal is to see how students thought process, to see their thought process and their answer, Jamboard may be a good example. And then if your goal is to listen to your students read and assess fluency, Literally is a good example or a good assessment tool. If you want to include checks for understanding as students learn, Edpuzzle is another good one. And if you wanted checks for understanding within your slides, Peer Deck is one. And then if you want to give students an opportunity to give each other feedback, there's Peer Grade. And then if you want to give a quiz or a test, there's Socrative. And then finally, the 12th one, if you want to grade grading that takes less time, you may try Floop. I think that's how you pronounce it. And then the last two are the ones that, again, that personally sparked my interest. 13, the digital escape room. Now, I have personally participated in the physical or in-person escape rooms with groups before, and I loved it. And so when I saw that there is actually a digital escape room, I thought how much fun and how much a good assessment tool that it could be. And so, as we learned, escape rooms foster collaboration and communication when played by students and teams and can be a fun way to gamify assessment. Students work together to solve problems or answer questions and then follow the instructions to break the code, similar to what you do in person. And then there are online escape rooms that are easy to build using Google Sites or Google Forms. And then if you want to do a quick check-in during your lesson, Mentimeter lets you add polls, word clouds, Q&As, and more to presentations and create an interactive experience for students who can vote on or respond to questions and engage with the presentation in real time. And so that concludes my presentation for Module 3. I hope that this was a great learning opportunity for you as it was for me while reading the literature and creating this video. Until next time, take care and thank you.